Hi guys, today we will be talking about Elizabeth I. This is history for sleep. Elizabeth I was born on the 7th of September 1533 in the Palace of Placentia. This is a funny name to many people. She was the daughter of Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn. Let's start by talking about Elizabeth's mother. It is unclear when Anne Boleyn was born, but she was the Queen of England from 1533 to 1536. As previously mentioned, she was the second wife of Henry VIII, the first being Catherine of Aragon. Anne Boleyn was known for almost always wearing a necklace in the shape of a bee. Well, the pendant was in the shape of a bee. It likely symbolised Boleyn. After her death, this necklace was passed down to her daughter Elizabeth, and she could be seen wearing it in certain paintings. Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn had a secret wedding that took place on the 14th of November, 1532. On the 23rd of May, 1533, the newly appointed Archbishop of Canterbury, but better known as Thomas Cranmer, declared Henry and Catherine's marriage as null and void. To negate this, Henry VIII created the Church of England, better known as the See of E. In 1534, Henry broke away from the Catholic Church. This was the religion that everyone else in England publicly followed, and Henry declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England. He did this through the Act of Supremacy. The reasoning was to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon so that he could marry Anne Boleyn. Creating a new church would allow him to make new rules and therefore allowing himself to remarry. Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn formally married on the 25th of January 1533. Anne Boleyn gave birth to Elizabeth I on September 7th, 1533 in Greenwich Palace. Henry made his discontent at having a daughter instead of a male heir very clear. Henry blamed Anne for this, even though it was something that she clearly could not control. Throughout the course of their marriage, Anne suffered 3 miscarriages. Henry, still wanting a male heir, began his search for another wife. Henry VIII first met Jane Seymour in 1535 when he visited her father at Wolf Hall. However, it wasn't until early 1536 that Henry began showing a much more focused interest in her. Jane was Anne's lady-in-waiting. Henry had found his next wife. He began looking for reasons to divorce Anne. He had to go along with something that sounded convincing to the public, of course. Henry had Anne investigated for high treason in April 1536. Henry claimed that Anne had a promiscuous nature, although in reality it was Henry who had a promiscuous nature. On the 2nd of May, Anne was arrested and sent to the Tower of London. She was tried before a jury. This jury included Henry Percy, who was her former betrothed, and her uncle, Thomas Howard, who was the 3rd Duke of Norfolk. Anne was convicted of the claimed crime of promiscuity on the 15th of May. When Elizabeth was only 2 years old, her mother, Anne Boleyn, would be killed. I will read to you Anne Boleyn's last words spoken before her execution. She stated, "I am come hither to die, for according to the law, and by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I pray God save the king, for a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there ever." End quote. Anne Boleyn was beheaded on the 19th of May, 1536. She was beheaded by a skilled swordsman from Calais, France, brought to England specifically for her execution. This was a much more merciful method than the axe typically used for the beheadings in England at the time. The execution was delayed because the swordsman was late, and there was some debate about whether her sentence should be changed. Some thought that the delay was a sign from God that the proceedings should not go on. Of course, we know today that Anne was unfortunately still killed, wrongfully. Despite the circumstances that anyone else would have broken under, Anne somehow managed to contain her composure, even making a jest about her thin little neck in reference to the swordsman's skill, insinuating that he would have no problem beheading her. With a single blow of the sword, Anne was dead. Her body and head were wrapped in a white cloth to symbolize what purity a dead body had left. She was then buried in an old arrow chest in the chapel of St. Peter and Vinicula within the tower. Over many years, historians have viewed the charges, which included adultery, supposed incest with Anne's brother George, and plotting to kill the king, as unconvincing. Anne had no reason whatsoever to commit regicide. Elizabeth I's childhood was marked by significant instability and trauma, including her mother's execution and her own removal from the line of succession. Records show that one of the last things Anne Boleyn did before she died was order clothes for her daughter Elizabeth. This is heartbreaking if you remember the circumstances. Anne made arrangements for Elizabeth's wardrobe, including an orange velvet gown, a yellow satin kirtle, and a black muffler. She also ensured the delivery of new caps for the toddler. At the point that these requests were made, Anne was well aware that she was going to die. This shows her maternal love and strength. She kept in mind clothes that she thought would go well with Elizabeth I's red hair. She did not complain about this. She simply wanted her daughter to look beautiful. Thanks to her mother, Elizabeth received an excellent education and developed into a strong and independent personality, although the event of her mother's beheading had a profound effect on Elizabeth, as one can only imagine. Following her mother's execution, Elizabeth was declared illegitimate and was removed from the line of succession. Her title had been downgraded from princess to lady. Henry's attitude towards Elizabeth was completely different. For a time, Elizabeth was largely neglected by her father and lived in relative isolation in Hatfield. Henry saw no use to Elizabeth. Her mother had allegedly cheated on him. She was a woman, and now illegitimate. Her life improved with the birth of her half-brother Edward. The two were not close, but now that Henry had a male heir, he was somewhat less aggressive. Unfortunately, after Edward was born, Jane Seymour passed away. It is believed that she contracted childbed fever. This is an infection caused by poor hygiene during labour. We all know that the 1500s were not a good time for hygiene. Jane Seymour is regarded as the true love of Henry VIII's life. He turned into a stony character after her death. Many pose this question: was she the most loved because of her personality and attributes, or because she was the only woman to bear Henry a son? I will leave that question with you. Elizabeth's life greatly improved when Henry got married to Catherine Parr. Catherine had a keen interest in Elizabeth's education and ensured she received the best possible education, including training in public speaking, which wouldn't have been necessary for Elizabeth, seeing as she was illegitimate. Henry grew very troublesome in his old age. His final years were marked by a significant decline in health before his death in 1547. His physical condition deteriorated due to obesity and painful leg ulcers which were caused by a jousting accident when he was younger. Accounts from servants working in the palace claimed that the pungent scent of Henry's leg ulcers could be smelled from several rooms away. The wounds also apparently never stopped weeping, and people would have to clean them out and replace the bandages twice a day. We can only hope that they got paid well, but judging in the medieval era, this is unfortunately very unlikely. Poor souls. Leg ulcers and obesity made walking difficult, requiring Henry to use a staff and a chair carried by guards, or he would simply sit on a sedan chair and be carried around. His waist was 54 inches when he died. He was apparently also plagued by constant headaches, migraines even, swollen ankles, and constipation. If you ask me, I say that he deserved it. Despite his declining health, Henry continued his royal duties. I think many people wish that he hadn't, and he became increasingly reliant on assistance. By 1546, he was carried around his palace and required assistance signing state papers using a carved wooden block for his signature. In the last 8 days of his life, Henry was bedridden and too weak to even lift a glass. His doctors were afraid to tell him that he was dying due to the Treason Act, which forbade predicting the king's death, as that was seen as a bad sign. The rules were not the same for a woman. The Archbishop at the time, Archbishop Thomas Cranmer, the same one who was there when Anne had been beheaded, gently informed Henry of his impending death. It is said that he did not take it well. Henry VIII died in the early hours of January 28, 1517, at Whitehall Palace in London. Henry's son, Edward, would be next in line to the throne. At this time, Edward was only 9 years old, definitely not old enough to become King of England. Henry was 17 years old when he had first become king. Due to his young age, a regency was established to govern the realm, initially led by his uncle, Edward Seymour, Duke of Somerset. Edward Seymour was named Lord Protector and effectively ruled over the country. Edward was a very sickly child, and he died on the 6th of July, 1553. He was 15 years old and passed at the Palace of Placentia, the same place that Elizabeth was born at. He died from possibly tuberculosis. It is unclear. After his death, he wanted the Catholic reign to continue, so he quickly, hastily even, appointed Lady Jane Grey. Lady Jane Grey was proclaimed Queen of England. Her reign lasted a grand total of 9 days. Lady Jane Grey was related to Henry VIII as his great-niece. Her mother, Frances Brandon, was the daughter of Henry VIII's younger sister, Mary Tudor. Therefore, Lady Jane Grey was Henry VIII's great-granddaughter through her mother. Lady Jane Grey's reign lasted from July 10th to July 19th, 1553. This brief period earned her the nickname of the 9 Days Queen. King Edward IV, who had passed away from tuberculosis, had previously named Lady Jane Grey as his successor in an attempt to prevent his Catholic half-sister, Mary, from inheriting the throne. However, Mary, gained popular support and quickly asserted her claim. She then deposed Lady Jane, who was later executed for alleged treason. Despite the brevity of her reign, Lady Jane was later tried for treason, like I previously mentioned, and executed on February 15th, 1554, at the age of 17. Something that shocks many people is that Mary, first, initially decided to spare Lady Jane Grey her life, but Jane soon became viewed as a threat to the crown when her father, Henry Grey, 1st Duke of Suffolk, became involved with a rebellion against Mary's intention to marry Philip of Spain. Mary saw Jane as a threat. She would not allow that. Jane and her husband were executed on the 12th of February, 1554. There is a very famous painting of Lady Jane Grey's execution. She is blindfolded and reaching out for the executioner's block. The executioner stepped in and he's guiding her towards it. It is a very sad painting, but I recommend you take a look. Maybe search it. Henry VIII had 2 daughters, Mary first and Elizabeth first. Mary's mother was Catherine of Aragon. Elizabeth's mother, as we know, was Anne Boleyn. Mary, first, also known as Bloody Mary, reigned as Queen of England and famously attempted to restore Catholicism, leading to the persecution of Protestants. Her reign is infamous for the persecution and burning of Protestants at the stake. This is how she earned the nickname Bloody Mary. Married Philip of Spain, but the marriage was unpopular among the people of England and France. Mary and Philip produced no children. Mary died of illness in 1558. No one can confirm this, of course, but historians think that she likely died from cancer of some kind. Maybe leukemia, people think. Mary I was succeeded by Elizabeth I. Elizabeth I reigned as Queen of England and Ireland from 1558 to 1603, a period known as the Elizabethan era. Elizabeth ascended to the throne at age 25. There was still a great unrest in England between the Protestants and the Catholics. These are both denominations of Christianity, if you were unsure. Elizabeth established a moderate Protestant Church of England. She navigated the religious divisions of the time and achieved a degree of religious peace. To some degree. The Spanish Armada took place in 1588, in the first year of Elizabeth's reign. The Spanish Armada was a massive fleet of ships that sailed from Spain towards England. The aim was to invade and overthrow Queen Elizabeth. England had become a Protestant nation under Elizabeth, while Spain remained a staunchly Catholic country under King Philip II. Mary I's husband from the marriage, which had produced no children. The Spanish Armada ended with a decisive defeat for Spain and a significant victory for England. The Spanish fleet was scattered and severely damaged by a combination of English naval tactics, including the use of fire ships and severe weather conditions, particularly storms in the North Sea and around the coasts of Scotland and Ireland. Less than half the original fleet of ships returned to Spain. On the 10th of October, the 29-year-old Elizabeth I was suddenly taken and seriously, dangerously ill at Hampton Court Palace, her late father's home. Her servants and doctors were thrown into panic. England had already lost 3 of its Tudor monarchs prematurely. Elizabeth was the last of Henry VIII's children to survive, with no clear successor. If the young queen died, it could spell the end of the dynasty. It is said that Elizabeth was doing what she could to keep her sickness at bay. She wanted to stay around to see herself become a great queen. It is said that she often took long baths to ease her aching limbs and to dry out the fever. This was not common for this time. Bathing was not common for this time. Despite advice from her doctors, Elizabeth carried on working. She sent several letters after she had been reported sick. On the 15th of October, 5 days after she had been proclaimed unwell, she signed off a letter to Mary Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's cousin, with an apology that a hot fever had prevented her from writing more. The following day, the diagnosis that Elizabeth and her court had dreaded was announced. Elizabeth was suffering from smallpox. Smallpox was one of the deadliest and most feared diseases of the Edwardian period. Those who survived the fever were often left hideously disfigured. No one wanted that fate for their queen. Behind the scenes, Elizabeth's health declined rapidly. She was confined to her apartments, where her life soon reportedly hung in the balance. Elizabeth underwent a red treatment. For this, she was wrapped in a red cloth. This was done to prevent scarring. It seems as if people were more worried about scarring over whether Elizabeth would actually survive or not. Apparently, Elizabeth fell into a coma for a short period of time. People believed that she had died, and plans were made for her funeral and burial. But, somehow, by some miracle, she survived the bout of smallpox and made a full recovery. Well, almost. As the court had feared, Elizabeth's face was left scarred and disfigured. Elizabeth herself was deeply concerned about the potential for permanent scarring. She was scared that this could impact her image, specifically how the court and how the people of England saw her. The court worried that this would affect her chances of getting married. They did not yet know that Elizabeth had no intention whatsoever to be wed. To combat this look of scarring, Elizabeth began to start a technique that she is known for today, lead face paint. Elizabeth used a thick white lead makeup called Venetian ceruse to cover her smallpox scars. Doing this was a common cosmetic practice for women in this era, particularly those seeking to find a pale complexion. Many people did this for the same reason as Elizabeth, to hide the scarring. As one can imagine, the grease paint was just another layer over textured scars. This pale base, in fact, made Elizabeth look worse. It looked like she had white lumps protruding from her skin. These were simply the scars covered up, but only her servants knew that. You may be wondering what a grease paint is made of. A recipe for Venetian ceruse from 1688 described the grease paint as a mixture of water, vinegar, and lead. The use of white lead as a pigment caused permanent and irreversible damage to the human body. This caused lead poisoning, skin damage, hair loss, and in some sorry cases, eventual death. Venetian ceruse was the most expensive and highly sought-after form of cosmetics, specifically ceruse. This made it almost exclusive to high-status individuals or the wealthy class. Many think that the reason it was favoured by European aristocracy was due to its high quality. This was not the only step to Elizabeth I's makeup routine. To further enhance the appearance of her pale skin, Elizabeth sometimes painted veins onto her hands and the inside of her wrists to make herself look more pale. Red lips were a less important part of the look, but nonetheless, this was achieved with vermilion, a pigment derived from uric sulfide. Elizabeth also plucked her eyebrows and her hairline, as a large forehead was fashionable and a sign of intelligence. Elizabeth also used belladonna drops in her eyes. Belladonna, also known as deadly nightshade, is a plant whose extracts, particularly atropine, has been historically used to dilate pupils for cosmetic purposes and are still used today in certain medical procedures. Belladonna contains alkaloids that cause pupil dilation and temporary paralysis of the eye's focusing muscle. Elizabeth's red hair was a challenge. While she wore red wigs, she also experimented with dyeing and bleaching to achieve the desired look. Elizabeth, especially as she grew older, frequently wore wigs to maintain her appearance. While she may have had naturally long, beautiful, wavy red hair, curly in some cases, she also used wigs for both fashion and to hide signs of aging, like greying hair. Historians and historical sources say that Elizabeth owned a large collection of wigs, perhaps over 85. Wigs became a popular fashion trend in England and France during her reign. Wigs became a status symbol among the aristocracy, all thanks to Elizabeth. Some records say that Elizabeth famously smelled very bad, but we must remember that bathing was not as common as it is today. People would bathe once a year, or, if they're very rich, twice a year, and even then, that is not that often. People thought that bathing stripped one of their natural oils, and they were stripping themselves of their protection from outside forces, the devil, and anything else that could be attacking. Perfumes and sweet waters were used to mask body odour. There are even recipes for perfumes designed to ward off the plague, but that is a story for another time. You can check out my other video for that. It is called Plague Doctors and Medieval Surgeries. Have a look after this video. Another thing that people commonly associate Elizabeth with is her teeth, or in this case, lack of them. Elizabeth had teeth that were blackened and rotted by decay. She had lost many teeth due to her sugary diet. Sugary, even for the 1500s. Elizabeth had lost so many teeth that foreign ambassadors claimed she was hard to understand. The problem was that Elizabeth had a great fear of dentists, or the better term, barber surgeons, as they were called back then. Even though she desperately needed to have a tooth or teeth pulled, Elizabeth was afraid. Before she would agree to any procedure, one of her bishops had to go through the procedure himself to prove to her that the pain involved was not that bad. Sugar itself was considered a luxury and was only available to the wealthy. Those who were not wealthy would actually find ways to blacken their teeth to be included in the sugar-eating fad. Women on the other side of the world, in Japan, also blacken their teeth, but that process is called ohugaru, and it is something not that different if you think about it. One of the most popular sugary treats was marzipan. Marzipan was made of almond and sugar paste and was moulded into a variety of shapes. A German traveller named Paul Hensner came to visit Elizabeth when she was 65 years old. This is what he had to say about her. Her face is oblong, fair but wrinkled, her eyes small yet black and pleasant, her nose a little hooked, her teeth a little black, because of her great use of sugar. She wore false, and that red. This was a reference to her red wigs. In her years, Elizabeth earned the title the Virgin Queen. This was because she never married, and therefore never had children. Elizabeth was famously married to England. That was her saying. Many people wonder why Elizabeth never married or had children. Of course, we will never know the true answer, but most think that she never married because she never fell in love, or that she was very busy with work, and she never had any children, simply to spite her father Henry VIII, who had always wanted a male heir, and for his lineage to continue. Elizabeth I and Mary Queen of Scots were cousins and rivals who never met, despite their close family and political ties. Mary was the granddaughter of Margaret Tudor, Henry VIII's sister. This gave Mary, Queen of Scots, a claim to the English throne that threatened Elizabeth's rule. Just to be clear, Mary Queen of Scots and Mary I were different people. Mary I is dead. Bloody Mary is dead. Their relationship was further complicated by religious differences. Elizabeth was a Protestant, and Mary Queen of Scots was a Catholic. Mary's arrival in England after fleeing Scotland in 1568 placed her directly in Elizabeth's path, turning her into a potential focal point for Catholic opposition. Elizabeth could not have this. Mary sought refuge in England after being forced to abdicate the Scottish throne following scandals and political turmoil. Elizabeth did not want Mary in England. Elizabeth imprisoned Mary for nearly 20 years. Ultimately, Mary was involved in several plots to overthrow Elizabeth, including the Babington plot. The Babington plot was a plan to assassinate Queen Elizabeth I of England and replace her with Mary Queen of Scots. It involved a group of English Catholics who planned to stage an uprising, free Mary from captivity, house arrest, and install her as queen. People working on the plot wanted a Catholic queen. Elizabeth was a Protestant. The two main people in this plan were Anthony Babington, a young English nobleman, and Mary Queen of Scots, who was under house arrest in England. Eventually, they were caught. Elizabeth's spies infiltrated the plot, intercepting and decoding letters between Mary and Babington. The plot led to the execution of Mary Queen of Scots, in 1587, as well as the execution of Babington and several other important people who were involved with the plot. The plot is seen as a turning point in the relationship between Elizabeth and Mary, and it contributed to the tensions between England and Spain, which eventually led to the Spanish Armada. Philip II saw himself as the protector of Mary, Queen of Scots, and he wanted to overthrow Elizabeth when she was executed. But as we already know, Elizabeth won the Spanish Armada. After 18.5 years in captivity on house arrest, Mary was beheaded at Fotheringhay Castle. Mary, Queen of Scots, died on the 8th of February, 1587, aged 44 years old. Like I said, she would die at Fotheringhay Castle. Mary's life and execution established her in popular culture as a romanticised historical character. After everything, Elizabeth's story comes to an end. Elizabeth I died on the 24th of March, 1603, at the age of 69, after a reign of 45 years. Many now believed she died by blood poisoning, but an autopsy at the time was not permitted, especially not for royals. Elizabeth I, the last Tudor monarch, died without a direct heir. James IV of Scotland, who was also a descendant of Henry VIII, the first Tudor king, was proclaimed the King of England as James I. While there was some initial shock and silent joy, rather than shouts of celebration, the transition of power was relatively smooth, with no immediate opposition or dynastic conflict. The death of Elizabeth I marked a significant shift in English history as the crown passed from the Tudor line to the Stuart line, and the country entered a new period under James I. Elizabeth's reign is regarded as the golden era, as she left an impact on us all. Thank you so much, guys. That is all the history I have for you today. I hope you enjoyed it. If you've been watching this long, comment an anatomical heart emoji in the chat. I apologise if I sound a bit different today. I do have a cold, but I really wanted to record this video for you guys. And the stop and starting was pauses for me to drink water. I hope that wasn't too obvious though. I got the information for this video from a bunch of different websites, not Wikipedia, I promise. I watched some YouTube videos to get more knowledge and looked through the odd textbook. Let me know in the comment section down below if this was a good mix. Look out for the stars. Bye!